Hello everyone, I hope all of you are doing great. This is Talal Hussain and I am discussing with you the SAT Digital SAT June paper. In the previous video, we talked about all the questions related to craft and structure. Here we are talking about standard English conventions. Now, standard English conventions, I normally tell my students it is one of the most important and one of the most easiest part of your paper. This is one of those sections where you can, easily score get a perfect score. The questions are very objective. You just need to know the rule. Just like, math, where if you did not know the rule, you were getting the questions wrong. When you get the rule, you get them right. That's how it goes. So let's just see now. And this is one thing that I normally tell my students, that when you start your papers, normally start with the standard English convention questions, because these are questions that will not waste your time, provided you have understood the concepts and you have got through the concepts. These questions will not waste that much of your time, and it will get you result as well. So you can get more done in less amount of time as compared to the other difficult reading questions. So that is why this can be a very crucial part, and it can get you a lot of points, a lot of score as well. So just make sure you go through all the concepts. It is primarily divided into forms, structure, and sense and boundaries, and I think which around 6 to 7 topics in both of them as well, right? So if you look at this question that we have over here, it says Henry Clay's image was printed on a $50 US banknote in 1869, making the former US Secretary of State one of the many non-presidents blank on the US currency. Now, one of the first thing is that you read the questions, obviously, and it will be a consistent. The question for all the the question that is for all the questions that are pertaining to standard English conventions, it is same, it is consistent, right? So it will ask you for a choice that completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of a standard English. So if you want a choice that is conforming to the conventions of a standard English, you need to know which of the convention is being tested on that particular question. That is something very, very important. So if you do not understand after reading the question which convention is being tested, then there's a problem. Obviously, if you don't know the convention that is being tested, it will be very difficult for you to answer the question. It will be very difficult for you to get the right answer, because you don't know in the first place what are you being tested on. So that is very important. That is something that you have to understand for all the questions, and that would only happen if you have a backlog of studying all of those rules, right? Many of my students, they're like, sir, we'll just go with whatever sounds right, whatever looks right. So that is also one of the things that you can do, but again, chances of error on that strategy, though they are higher, and secondly, it may take more of your time. However, if you know the rule, if you know what has to go through in a particular sentence, then it will save your time, and it will save you of the hassle of getting into what is feeling right, looking right, and all of that. So that would be that gets a little confusing as well, right? So if you look at over here, now the best way to identify, I tell my students to identify which of the conventions is being tested, is to see the difference in the option. So for example, if one of the option is singular, the other one is plural, and that is the only difference in the options, chances are that it may be a subject verb agreement question, because that is what we have to look at when we talk about subject verb agreement questions, right? So if you look at it over here in these options, the difference in the options that we have is the change of verbs. So this question looks like it is a question of verb forms, right? So this is a question of verb form. So when we have questions of verb forms, we have to find out which verb form is the best for the blank that we have. Now, one of the major rules, or one of the major ways in which we can do that, is that we look at the type of verbs that are already there in the passage, right? So it has to be consistency. It has to be consistency. So there's a rule called verb tense consistency, and there's one more thing that we can take into account in these questions, and that is parallel structure, right? So parallelism. So what is parallelism or parallel structure? It tells us that whenever we have a list, or whenever we have related verbs, they have to be of the same form, or they have to be from the same family, right? So if we look at this sentence, it says Henry Clay's image was printed on a $50 banknote in 1869, making the former US Secretary of State one of the many non-presidents blank on US currency. Now, if you write did appear, if you write had appeared, or if you write appears. Now, one of the problems with these three options is that you will need a subject for it. So, if you look at the sentence, it says making the former US Secretary of State one of the many non presidents blank on the US currency. So, non presidents blank on the US. So, you have to have an infinitive over here. That is why the best answer over here will be option D. So that is something that we have to take into account, and this is something that normally students tend to forget as well, because we are not sure which of the tenses that we are going to have. So it has to be an infinitive, because if you talk about appears, so appears, normally simple tenses or simple present tenses are used when you have a scenario where something is being repetitive, something is a fact, something is a law. So that is not the scenario, right? If we talk about had appeared, so for had appeared, you need to have multiple verbs, you need to be perfect. Again, that is again not the scenario. And did appear again is not going in, right? So it has to be to appear. So if you know the rule, obviously it will be very easy for you. All right, so moving on. If you look at the next question, it says many experts like lawyer, cycling advocate Ernesto Hernandez Lopez have proposed bike travel as one possible way to alleviate congestion on the busy roadways of Los Angeles County, California. Indeed, local bike paths like El Dorado bicycle path, which is 4 miles long, have become an increasingly popular means of travel for commuters and recreational trips alike. So if you look at this question, okay, so we are going to start it from here, because this previous sentence is done. We don't pretty much we don't have anything to do with this. If you start reading it from over here, it says indeed local bicycle paths, this is plural, like the El Dorado bicycle path, which is 4 miles long. So this which is 4 miles long has to be in a positive, right? And it requires a non-restrictive clause, right? So if you go for that, obviously you need a comma before which. There is no question about that. So if you don't have a comma before which, it would be an incorrect question, and because of which we are going to eliminate option B and option D. Now, if you look at option A and C, the thing that it is over here is that you cannot use a period after long. Why? Because this sentence is going on. If you look at this have become is for paths, right? The paths have become an increasingly popular means of travel for commuters, right? So if you put a full stop or a period after long, that will break the connection between the two parts of the sentences, or that will break the connection between the subject or the verb and the verb of the sentence. So that will be a big problem, and obviously you cannot do that. So what you're going to do over here is that you're going to take a comma before which, and you're going to take a comma after long. That would make it a non-restrictive clause, and that would also make it a modifier, that is talking about this particular path, bicycle path, El Dorado Park, right? So that will make it C to be the best answer for your question. And you have to understand this, that if you have an appositive, even if it if it were before without which, right? If you have it without which, even then you need 2 commas before it. West Virginia blank 4,620 feet in elevation reaches its highest point in Spruce Knob. Now this is one liner sentence, and again you have to identify the convention. Like I told you, if you want to identify the convention, one thing that you can do is you can look at the differences in the options, right? So if you look at the differences in the options, you have one of them is past, one of them is present, and one of them is there's a difference. This is plural, and this is singular, and this is again a gerund. So firstly you have to see whether you need a verb or not, right? So if you look at it over here, the sentence, because of these commas, you can understand that this part is an appositive or this part is a modifier, right? So what the actual game is, West Virginia reaches its highest point at Spruce Knob. So that is the game. So if you look at it, you don't technically need a verb over here, because the subject is only West Virginia, and if you bring in a verb over here right now, you won't have a subject for it, and that would be a problem, right? So you have to have something that is not a verb, and that is only in one option, and that is a spanning. So spanning is what? When you have a verb and you have an ing after it, right? This becomes what? This becomes a gerund. So when you have a gerund over here, it won't be a verb. That will be the best answer for your question, and that is why we'll be taking B over here as our answer. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) tracks comparative price list data for its 38 member countries. According to this data, in July 2021, a basket of goods and services priced at $100 US dollars in the United States would have cost 106 USD in fellow OECD member. So if you look at it, if you look at this sentence, it says that according to the data, now it is making a comparison and it is taking the name of the OECD member. So if you want to, say what was the name of that particular OECD member, the best option will be that you use a description, right? You can use a comma as well, but this obviously would be better over here. Would have cost 106 USD in the fellow OECD member, and that was Sweden. So the option that you have in which you have a colon, that is only option D, and that is why option D is going to be the best answer for your question over here. This is going to be the best answer. While the greater adjutant can be found in places like the inner Gulf of Thailand and Manchar Lake in Pakistan, more than 80% of this endangered stock species is found in Assam, India. There, wildlife biologist Dr. Purnima Devi Burman is on the front lines of conservation efforts, through community involvement and scientific study, aim to bring adjutant back to the near extinction. Now, if you look at it, normally, if you read the concepts and if you talk about that and the placement of punctuations when you have that in the sentence, you'll normally see that, you never have, or you tend to normally don't use commas after or before that, right? So that is somewhat a rule, but over here we are going to use comma after that. Why? Because you have a modifier. So if you talk about it, it says through community involvement and scientific study. So this, if you talk about, this becomes a modifier. So because you have a modifier, or you have a restrictive clause, or you have an appositive right after that, it has to be between two commas. So the comma that you're using after that is not really about something that has to do with that. It is because you have a modifier, and that modifier or a positive has to have a comma before it. That is why you will be using a comma over here, right? So the best answer over here in this case will be option C. That is why we are going to go on with it. If you look at option A, there's no comma, B no comma, and D no comma. If there were a dash over here, we might have gone with a dash as well, but that again has to be a different scenario. But over here, the best answer for your question will be option C. In knot theory, the mathematical study of curved closed loops, knots are characterized by their crossing numbers, that is, the number of times he knotted the thread crosses over itself. The trefoil knot and the figure 8 knot, each with a crossing number below 5, blank among the simplest possible knots with the fewest number of crossings. So if you look at it over here, you need obviously a verb over here. And as you look at the options, because you have to identify the conventions first, so you have this as singular, you have this as singular, and you have this as singular, and you have this as plural. So you have three options that are singular, and you have one option that is plural. So this question looks to be a question from subject verb agreement. So if you want to find what is going to be the verb, if you want to know what is going to be the verb, you have to first find the subject and see whether it is singular or not, or whether it is plural or not. And you just have to treat the verb accordingly. You have to go in line with the subject as per the verb. So if the subject is singular, the verb should also be singular. If the subject is plural, the verb should also be plural. And that is how it has to go, right? So if you look at it over here, it says the trefoil knot and the figure 8 knot. So you just have to remember that whenever you have a subject that has and in it, so obviously when you have and, you can never have it with something that is singular, right? So if you have something that is plural, the related verb has to be plural as well, right? So because it has to be plural, you can never go with an option that is singular. That is why you will be eliminating option D, option C, option B, because your subject is the trefoil knot and the figure 8 knot. So these are the two things that are your subject, right? So you have to eliminate singular options, and at the end of the day, your subject will be A. And this is something that you can keep as a note or side note or whatever. When you have something that is singular in your subject, your verb has to be, when you have something like and in your subject, your verb has to be plural. That is for sure. That is something that you need to keep in mind at all times. At 4,900 years old, Prometheus, a Great Basin bristlecone pine, located in the United States, was one of the oldest known trees in the world, with almost 5 millennia of climate data in its tree rings. A single tree like this, claims dendrochronologist Valerie Trout, can tell the history of the world. So if you look at it, you have to understand one thing. Normally what we understand is, when you have a noun, and if you have a description of that particular noun right after it, right? If you have a noun and if you have a description of that noun right after it, normally what we do about this is that we normally use it between two commas. This is how what we do, right? But there are instances like this sentence where we have the description before the noun, right? So we'll have the description and we'll have the noun after it. So when this scenario becomes inverted, just like I have explained over here, so if you have the noun before and you have the description after it, you'll have it between two commas. But if you have the description before and you have the noun after it, it will not have any commas in before or after it. There won't be any commas, right? So it won't be option A, it won't be option B, and it won't be option D. You will only be left with option C, where you do not have any commas, right? So if you had this name, this description after the name, right, then you must have then you must use two commas, and you should divide it with two commas. That is something you have to remember. So this is a very important concept. This is basically case 1 and this is case 2. So guys, you have to remember that you always see the questions on the SAT reading and writing parts in components, right? If you do that, that is the only way of scoring good, and especially knowing where you are faltering, right? So if we were doing craft and structure first, we have to understand that that is a different set of component, and we need different skill set to do that. When it comes to standard English conventions, it is a completely different world. We need different skill sets to do that. And again, when we'll move on to information and ideas, and we'll move on to expressions of ideas, that is again completely something that is different, and we need different skill sets for each of the sections. So we have to make sure that we acquire those skill sets. Hopefully after the discussion of these papers, we'll move on to the skill sets and everything as well. So guys, just make sure that you do this well, you practice this well. We have the August test on our it's just coming, 10 days to go. So just keep on practicing. I thought it would be better if we start doing these. So this was standard English conventions from the June paper. I'll be coming up with the other components as well. Until then, take care. Thank you so much.